Citations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore. And today's video, boys and girls, we're going to be talking about Mr. Perturabo. Because we're back, ladies and gentlemen, with what our people get wrong about X series. And today we're going to be finding out just exactly what people get wrong about the Lord of Iron. So, strap in and buckle up, and let's get cracking on with today's video. But before we can begin in earnest, I must kindly ask, but before you guys get into this video, please, take a moment to grab the link and just post it in whatever Discord server, if you're able to and allowed to, group DM or whatever, and just share it with somebody. The best way for this channel to grow and for people to see this video is not via the YouTube algo, but rather mouth of word. The more people see it, the more people like it, and that's what feeds the algorithm, not the other way around. So, if you guys could please do that for me, I would highly appreciate it. Alright, sweet. Mr. Perturabo is the primarch of the 4th Legion Iron Warriors, and he was founded upon the world of Olympia. Olympia was very heavily based upon the classical form of the Greek city-states, except with advanced technology, and his adoptive father used him as such. Perturabo was essentially the end goal. He was the trump card, he was the masterstroke, he was the bestest, the brightest, and the brilliant most of the time, and he was used as leverage so that his particular city-state would become the greatest and eventually rule the entire planet, with Perturabo ruling as its ruler. However, Biggie would then pitch up and he would appoint Perturabo command of the 4th. And throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade, the 4th Legion would do a lot of the very undesirable jobs. Heavy attrition, dirty work, siege work, and Perty would never really get a thank you. And Perty being Perty, stubborn bastard that he is, he never asked for a thank you, or for any recognition. This led to resentment and building up and pent-up tension, as well as a bunch of other stuff that we'll get into later, which then resulted in Mr. Perturabo joining Horus and rebelling against the Emperor. And throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade, Perturabo would indeed prove that his legion was certainly the most effective of all the traitors, leading the traitors all the way to Terra and being the first to crack a hole in Dawn's defenses. But eventually he would see the traitor cause disintegrate into madness and he would retreat into the Eye of Terror, before being wounded by his brother Fulgrim and forced to ascend to chaos and being turned into some type of chaotic demonic dreadnought. From there, Mr. Perturabo has done pretty nothing since, and we're waiting for GW to return his sculpt. My lord, what money they would make. So, that is the current TLDR of Mr. Perturabo. A little shorter than usual, but that's because I'm really excited to get into the meat and potatoes of this video. And that is, what is Mr. Perturabo supposed to be? What do people get wrong about him, and what exactly is his character? And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Perturabo is a Greek tragedy. Very nice if I do say so myself. Usually GW is pretty heavy-handed with this, but this is, just subtle enough that it's tasteful. So I like it. Now, why do I say that? You see, with Perturabo, his greatest strength is his sheer tenacity. That is his greatest characteristic. He will not yield. He is unbending as iron, but that is also his greatest flaw. Just as iron does not bend, it only shatters. Perturabo will not yield until he is broken utterly, meaning that in the best of scenarios, he is amazing, stalwart, and defiant. In the worst of scenarios, he's stubborn, narcissistic, and egotistical. His greatest strength is his greatest weakness, and ultimately, his undoing. It's very Greek in that aspect. You take a look at Greek tragedies, their greatest strengths are often their greatest weaknesses and ultimately the cause of their downfall. It's the idea that balance is needed, and when there is no balance, one's life lives in that swing, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And Perturabo fits that to a T. Now the thing is though, what people don't understand about Perturabo is that he had the potential to be one of, if not the greatest primarchs period. For those who don't know, Perturabo is objectively the smartest primarch, or he's at least the top 2, top 3. He is incredibly intelligent, mainly because of his photographic memory. He can drink in information, memorize it, and absorb it into his very being. Now whether or not this is just him or part of his primarch powers, don't really know. But the man is magic when it comes to that. So he's able to understand every single thing in terms of knowledge. But we see that in Perturabo in his story, where the flaw lies in is that his understanding of it seems to be lacking. In other words, he has a great deal of knowledge, but he's lacking in wisdom. And ultimately, that comes to the whole crux of the point. You take a look at Perturabo's character and people often ask, hey, how did Perty get to this point? How did he become so bitter, so childish, so petulant? How did this happen? And I want to make something very clear. Perturabo is a character that I do not like, personally. Mainly because his flaws are so human, but they're human to the point where it's so easy for him just to have changed that it makes me upset, because I'm like, it's so simple. But then some would argue that makes it even more human. Perturabo is indeed all of these things. He's narcissistic, he's egotistical, and he's a giant stick up his ass. But that's only because he never had anyone to teach him the right way. For those of you who don't know, 40k's alternate tagline is indeed the perils and consequences of not having a proper father figure, as the majority of the issues with the primarchs could have been solved if Big E was not such a shit dad. But Perturabo is one of, if not the greatest examples of that. You see, with Perturabo, what he needed, and I always say this, he needed a firm kick up the arse to stop being an asshole, but he also needed a beautiful hug to tell him that he's enough. Perturabo did indeed have advisors and counselors, but whenever those advisors and counselors would tell him, hey, you're being a shithead, stop, he would either kill them, kick them out, or dismiss them, a la Barbius D'Antioch, because to him, they were all inferior to him, which they were technically. But that's the thing, with someone like Perturabo, you're never going to take advice from someone whom you feel is inferior to you. Meaning that you need someone superior than Perturabo, not only that, but someone who Perturabo admits is superior to him, to come in and to teach him a lesson. Because while Perturabo's adoptive father did indeed love and care for him, he was never Perturabo's equal, he was never greater than him. Also, he used him as a tool. He was the trump card. Perturabo grew up in basically the Greek city-states, and for those of you who know your history, the Greek city-states are notorious for being scheming, politically petty, backstabbing. It's just a mess. They were incredibly disunited. Meaning that Perturabo grew up in that space where you couldn't really trust anyone. In fact, the only one he really could trust was his sister, hence why her betrayal, quote-unquote, was something that stung at him so deeply and caused him to crash out like that. See, Perturabo's father could never tell him what to do, because Perty wouldn't listen or Perty would make some excuse. Perty's father could never be a father. To be a father, what you need is that you need someone to tell you right and wrong, but more importantly, someone you respect and fear, healthy fear, mind you, to an adequate degree. And the only person who was capable of doing that was the Emperor. And whilst the Emperor did indeed feed Perturabo's need for knowledge, he didn't sit down with him and he didn't give him the time of day to teach him wisdom. Knowledge without wisdom is arrogance. Wisdom is the temperance to balance the iron. Perturabo was a massive brick of hot iron, ready, red, forged, rearing, super strong, but missing that final step, the quenching, the process that would turn him from nearly finished into perfect steel, or would turn him from iron into steel. That is what he was missing, and that was wisdom. But that wisdom could only come from someone older than him, someone more experienced, and the only person that Perturabo would even allow to do that would be the Emperor. But ultimately, the Emperor did not do that. The Emperor did not treat Perturabo in any way which he needed. Ironically, he strengthened the things that Perturabo was already good at, but the things that Perturabo was so criminally lacking in, the Emperor neglected. Now again, there's a whole story of, oh no, this was meant to happen, yada yada, the Emperor, whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what actually happened. And the fact of the matter is that Perturabo never had somebody to hold him together. He never had someone to teach him. Which is why you take a look at some of the greatest, most well-rounded primarchs, Rebute, Sanguinius, Vulcan. They all had both strong parental figures, both moms and dads. Perturabo was lacking that. He never had someone whom he saw as above him. He never had someone who he acknowledged as greater than him. He never had someone who he could rely on. The only one he had was his sister, and whilst he could confide in her, he could not rely on her in political matters or matters of warfare or matters of craft. He couldn't. He couldn't have anyone he could be vulnerable with on that level. Because whilst his sister was indeed a comfort to him, his sister was not a soundboard to him, someone who he could stand truly as an equal. And some of you may think, oh no, if Big E just gave him a little bit of time, it would have been alright, but that's not the thing. Big E would need to give him a lot of time, not just a little. Why? Because people often forget this very important fact about Mr. Perturabo, the fact that the bastard could see the warp 24/7. For those of you who don't know, Perturabo, for one reason or another, whether it be a ploy of Tzeentch, the Chaos Guards, or a side effect of being shot through the warp, the minute this man opened his eyes, he could see the warp. I mean, imagine it like this. You go to bed after a night out, you bed yourself a solid 10, you're good, you're great, you wake up, the booze wears off, and you realize that 10 is missing a 0, and you are screaming for the demon next to you. That is Perturabo, except, somehow a little less than bad. I mean, depends on how much booze you drank. Perturabo, from the get-go, had the Eye of Terror looking at him, watching at him. Aside from all the psychic shenanigans that went on with that, the sheer paranoia that could be induced by not only thinking that someone is watching you, knowing that something is watching you. That paranoia, combined with the fact that Perturabo grew up in a place where betrayal, political intrigue were not just common, but the norm. The fact that his father, someone who was protect him and guide him, used him as a tool, not out of malice mind you, but just because, he's a primarch. And with the whole fact that he never got a companion figure, even amongst his brothers. There was only one that he truly loved, and that was Magnus, and that was because of their shared love of knowledge, but he still never saw him as an equal. It's no wonder why Perturabo grew this way, why he ended up becoming this person who just hated everyone, who thought that he was better and thought that everyone was out to get him. The man was set up to fail from the start. He had nothing going for him. Perturabo was from the very beginning someone who was supposed to be the greatest of the great, the king of his city-state, let's say. Again, going with the whole allegory of this being Greek tragedy. He was the prince errant. He was meant to be the first. He was meant to be the greatest king that had ever seen. But through his own misuse, through his lack of understanding, through failing to take the wisdom of his peers, to listen to his counselors or abide by his seniors, he ended up becoming a tyrant, a monstrous lord of iron, who showed no love, who showed no joy, who showed no happiness. Instead of being the stalwart strength that iron brings, the warm endurance that forging of iron occurs, what iron was supposed to be, Perturabo ended up being cold, brittle, evil, and ultimately fragile. For when iron is not forged correctly, when it is not tempered correctly, there is no strength in it. There is only a brittle nature waiting for the slightest crack to spread. And that ultimately is what Perturabo was. Perturabo, throughout the Heresy, is a character who is just so close, yet so far away at the same time. And ultimately, that's where my hatred for the character comes from. It's so frustrating, it's so infuriating that he's so close to goodness, so close to greatness, but then ultimately slips away because no one is there simply to tell him. In fact, he ends up hating someone who he should love the most. I'm talking about Dawn here. Dawn would be the perfect foil, the perfect companion for Perturabo. He would be his perfect equal. But instead of seeing a kindred spirit worthy of love and affection, because of how Perturabo was grown up, because of the paranoia, because of the tragedy, because of the betrayal, he saw Dawn as a rival. Not only a rival, but a less worthy rival who is heaped upon accolades purely because of circumstance, purely because people did not see Perturabo for what he was. Perturabo blamed everyone else but himself, because growing up, it was usually everyone else's fault but his. It wasn't a case that Perturabo was inherently born with this, it was something that was taught to him. Perturabo is a creature of logic and a creature of habit. So when something is taught to him again and again and again, and his brain can logic the outcome, of course he would make it a core part of his character. Again, that's the big flaw. Knowledge without the wisdom to utilize it, without the wisdom to interpret it. And that is what Perturabo was. Knowledge, knowledge, and more knowledge, but no wisdom to actually make the knowledge to good use. And people often give Perturabo a lot of shit, granted, willingly. He deserves a lot of shit, he did a lot of bad stuff. But if you read his story throughout the Heresy, we slowly get to understand that Perturabo is taught that everything he thought that he knew was in fact wrong. Whilst there are some things that are confirmed, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really make sense to him. For example, he gets humbled by Alexis Pollux. Now granted, I'm not saying Pollux was going to wipe the floor with him, but a Space Marine against a Primarch, and the fact that it was a draw, or, a very Pyrrhic victory on both sides, it wasn't an outright win. That's the end goal here. The fact that that happened, Perturabo was stunned. And even again, when his bodyguard died protecting him doing their job, he deemed them a failure. So he created the Iron Circle. But even those would fail. Throughout the Heresy, he believed that he was on the right side, that he was following the right people. He believed that he was on the side of logic, of understanding, of true strength, not this devoid machinations of the Emperor, only to get to the final crux of the Siege of Terra, the literal end goal of it, the final thing, and then to see that those around him are quite literally barbarians, blood-crazed butchers, hedonistic zealots, and rotting corpses. That is what Perturabo just snapped. So he up and abandoned, and then we have the Iron Cage, Perturabo's seemingly greatest achievement. Yet, the achievement did not taste sweet. If anything, it was only more bitter. Some say it was marred by the Ultramarines, but in reality, Perturabo never really wanted that. He thought he did, but that wasn't the case. Perturabo never got what he wanted. He never had what he needed. So he kept on trying to fill and fill and fill that void. And we said throughout the entirety of the Heresy, Perturabo eventually comes to understand something even if he doesn't want to accept it. That, he doesn't know everything. That there are things that the world can teach him, and that he doesn't have a firm understanding of everything. He finally realizes that his knowledge is missing wisdom. And I touch upon this about why my Iron Warriors are the greatest traitor Legion video, and it goes on explaining that, hey, if Perturabo was to come back, he'd kind of be like the Lion, a very matured, understanding, calculating character. His arrogance, his egotism, all of that is measured and controlled and kept in check by his newfound maturity, which is why a mature Perturabo would be one of the most devastating things the Imperium could face. And the only way he could be stopped was if the Lion fought against him. Legion against Legion, Primarch against Primarch. Again, I liken him unto a kin of that of Admiral Thrawn from Star Wars. Not necessarily a villain, but a very, very good antagonist. And ultimately, with Perturabo, he is a character that is so close to perfection. If they bring him back, and they give him just that maturity, if they give him a little bit of wisdom, we will get the most competent Chaos character ever. Something like a Vashdor. And I just crave that. I crave that, and it's highly unlikely that GW will ever bring Perturabo back in any meaningful form. But still, I really want to see Perturabo's character fulfilled. Again, I may hate the character, but I don't hate the character, I hate how the character is currently. Again, it's kind of like, I kind of feel this odd kinship with Perturabo, very similar with how I feel with Fulgrim, in that I kind of relate to him, I kind of get it. Growing up, I was someone who always had to be perfect, and I was also someone who was always expected to do everything. I was always the last person to leave whenever we had an event or anything. If it was at school, I was always the last person to get off. I always did the tasks that no one else wanted. And I could easily have become as bitter as Perturabo. I know a thing or two about history, like I'm a history buff, means that I have more common knowledge, or more not common knowledge, I should say, than most people. It'd be very easy for me to fall into Perturabo's trap and think myself some God King complex. Yet, I didn't. Because I had mentors, people above me who I listened to, who taught me right from wrong, and had my old man to give me a slap across the head if I ever strayed down that path. So looking at this character, it's very aggravating, because everything that stopped me from going down that path was so simple, and I'm like, why couldn't you have that? And ultimately, I realized that Perturabo truly is one of the most human of Primarchs. Because whether we like it or not, humanity is petty, humanity is arrogant, humanity is stupid, and 90% of the problems we humans face could simply be resolved if we simply took a step back and talked to each other, and actually listened to each other. If Biggie came across, gave Perty a good old smack across the head, gave him a hug, and actually made him listen to someone, and have him understand what was going on, Perturabo would have never fallen traitor. He would have never carried his legion like this. He and the Iron Warriors would have been, I think it's safe to say, the top 3 greatest legions. I know it's a hell of a statement, but a refined Iron Warriors, iron turned into steel, that is something completely different. And to me, this is something that I just yearn for, purely because I don't want Perturabo's story to end as a Greek tragedy, him being turned into something he despised the most, half demonic, half machine construct, just languishing, laying in waste, waiting for death to claim him. It's not a fitting end for him. And some may say it is because of what the decisions he make, but that's fair, but I want to see him sort of redeemed. But not necessarily redeemed as him come back to the Imperium, but him redeemed as seeing his character come full circle. That is what I want. And that is what I hope we get, however unlikely it may be. So, the next time you guys think about Mr. Perturabo, remember, yes, he's still angry, yes, he's still bitter, yes, he's still a petulant manchild, and yes, he deserved everything that happened to him. But in the same vein, he didn't have anyone to point and to tell him what's right and wrong. He didn't have someone to show him the way. He was missing someone to give him wisdom to his knowledge. Now some may argue that, hey, it's his fault for not seeking out wisdom, but why would you seek something out that you have no idea what it is, let alone how important it is? Perturabo is indeed a Greek tragedy. His greatest strength was ultimately what led to his ultimate downfall, but I would like to see him revived. I would like to see him reborn, as the old ancient demigods of Greece, of the mighty pantheon of the Hellenes. Let this son of Olympia return. Let him return, not as some perfect god clad in gold and white, but as refined, as a demigod hero of myth, clad in battle scars yet wearing himself proudly. Let him return as a true Lord of Iron, a true heir to the throne of Olympia. Or if Perturabo would return, he would not be the Lord of Iron, but he would be the God King of Steel, refined, better, stronger, and exactly what he was meant to be. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I want from Perturabo, and that is what I want y'all to remember about him. Also, remember how he grew up in the city-states and there was a lot of stabbing and how that was normal. Also, he had the literal eye of terror looking at him 24/7. Bro could not have a wank in peace. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you agree with Mr. Perturabo? Do you guys like what I said? Do you disagree? And do you think that GW should bring him back? Do you think they will? Do you guys, like me, relate to Perturabo in any way, shape, or form? Is this something that could have happened in your life? Did you guys have some great mentors that stopped you from going down this path? Yeah, let me hear what you guys about to think. But I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and patrons. Big shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3, Miss Majora of the Void, and General Alexander. Massive shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Corns Butcher, and Mr. Sean IRL7. Big shout out to my Corporal tier members, Mr. Bowen and Mr. Tremeo the Math Kitty. And Mr. Bowen again because he's technically signed up twice. And then finally, massive shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SVW, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Hattori's Curse, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, and Mr. Fortus Unum. Thank you, each and every one of you, sincerely from the very bottom of my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate each and every one of you. So, if you want to help out this channel, join these awesome people, join the memberships, you get access to these videos early, a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, as well as first-hand accounts into things that goes into it. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming here. I'm trying to get everything in order, but remember, this will always be free, and whether you give me $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! Yes, I will. The videos are going to be a little slipshod throughout the next couple of weeks. We had a massive storm and the power grid kind of got shit up, so like, I'm now at a coffee shop doing this, well, not recording at the coffee shop, I'm editing this, but hey, it's gonna come, but just bear with me, and thank you guys for love and support. So if it's a little choppy, yeah, that's why you know why. But ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed this video, and I do hope that you guys enjoyed a story about Mr. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101, you've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people, thank you all so very much for watching. Make sure you stay strong out there, boys and gals, and I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. I cannot wait once again for someone to call me an Iron Warrior simp, even though I have said continuously that I hate Perturabo.